So I'm doing a reflection on the guest speaker Lisa Dilworth, Superintendent TDSB, and Nicole Miller, Principal Henry Kelsey, Senior Public School TDSB. They focused on instructional leadership, and so the learning outcomes were looking at the importance of the principal as instructional leader, also looking at the Ontario Leadership Framework, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and Equity competencies and their alignment to the SIP, and engage in how instructional leadership, including school structure and scheduling, literacy and numeracy, Fab 5, and then case study. So the case study was you are a newly appointed vice principal in a large dual track elementary school where the English program is very small in comparison to the French track. In your walkthroughs, you have noticed that many teachers in both tracks use very traditional methods, presenting lessons and having students complete in-class worksheets. Many of the pandemic accommodations are still in place in classrooms. Example, desks in rows, no sharing of materials, independently learning. More than half of the students in grade 1 were not reading at the expected grade level at the end of June. Several parents have asked you and the principal what teachers are doing to address gaps in learning as a result of the pandemic. Many students in the English grade 7-8 class are Black and racialized, and their teacher has commented to you that they have poorly developed learning skills. What are the issues to address in this situation? So the reflection was that the lesson is not culturally responsive. The um, teacher has a deficit mindset and not looking at celebrating Black excellence. And so those are focused mainly, there needs to be this equity mindset in terms of um, improving literacy. So this is the Ontario Leadership Framework, and it's specifically on the instructional program. And so the components are school leaders. What they have to do is recruit and select teachers who have interest and capacity to further the school's vision and goals. Retain skilled teachers by providing support and time for collaboration, shared leadership, creating a shared vision, and building trusting relationships. And providing instructional support, actively oversee an instructional program, coordinate what is taught across subjects and grades to avoid unnecessary overlap while providing needed reinforcement and extension of learning goals. Provide adequate preparation time for teachers, provide advice to teachers about how to solve classroom problems, and also monitoring progress in student learning and school improvement. So for school leaders, it's assisting staff in understanding the importance of student assessment for, of, and as learning, use multiple sources of evidence when analyzing student progress, collect and use data about the status of those classroom and school conditions that are the focus of the school improvement efforts, and buffering staff from distractions to their work. So creating and enforcing consistent school-wide discipline policies, minimize daily disruptions to classroom instructional time, developing staff guidelines to govern the amount of times teachers spend on non-instructional and out-of-school activities, and regularly assess the contribution of all out-of-classroom activities to the learning priorities of students. So TDSB has the equity competencies, and this was created as a complement to the Ontario Leadership Framework with a view to making equity leadership competencies clear. So if you see the last one, you have the equity and anti-oppressive leadership. So the onus of the responsibility is improving the instructional program. And so going back to the case study, it's so important to understand what the students' lived experiences are and really affirming the students' identities in the classroom. And and one other aspect to focus on is looking at the TRC calls to action. Um, what is needed from us as instructional leaders to enact this work? So that's something I've been reflecting on, and that's why in my practicum I have a workshop and resources based on Indigenous education, and so it's celebrating Indigenous excellence and and going beyond the trauma that has been experienced. So what's really interesting is that as instructional leaders, it's important to really look at street data. And so we're at the crossroads in the movement for equitable schools. While equity has entered the popular discourse in education, we're struggling to transform our fundamental paradigm of how schools operate, a paradigm born of inequality. So we're using the wrong data to make our important educational decisions, and as a result, further marginalize the students we claim to want to serve. So it's interesting in reflecting on this, how it's it's so important to do the street data, the fine and ambiguous kind. And so it's requires focus on learning and observation, informing and shaping, which inform and shapes our next moves. So what does street data do? It helps us understand student, staff, and parent experience, as well as specific misconceptions and mindsets, helps us to monitor students' internalization of important school skills. And this comes down to the instructional core. So it's focus on assessments that are ongoing and focus on student thinking. And so the instructional core talks about three key areas, which is the student, expectations, engagement, and the teacher, the task, what students are actually doing, which leads to improved student achievement, which is the interaction between the teacher and the content, making sure that because it's so important in improving the teacher's instructional practice, improving their knowledge and skills, but at the same time, the content has to be rigorous and relevant. And so providing this academically challenging content. So improvement planning and school assessment, you have the direct district leadership and then trustees, local community, parents, school community, and then the student, teacher, principal, teachers, director, SOs, the premier minister, and the curriculum itself. So it's through first the core priorities, instructional leadership and government, that leads to the BIP, which is instructional leadership in school districts, and then the SIP, which is instructional leadership in schools, leading to the instructional tasks, which is instructional core leadership in the classroom. So So the process is defining the goal, gathering the documentation, analysis, interpretation, and next steps, and then this cycle does start over again. So gathering the documentation, Um, and going back to the street data, it's like thinking about things like stories, photos, artifacts, products, records of reading behaviors, authentic writing, documentation panels. So observational notes, transcripts. It's all about how to capture this student voice and making student thinking visible. So this is so connected to what was talked about with street data. And it's so important to have various voices and perspectives, educators, staff, students, families, the community, and different ways to gather the documentation and also the methods. And so when analyzing, interpreting the documentations, it's so important to make sure really understand, is there um, what are my beliefs, what's my identity, power and privilege, is there and I have to look and reflect on any unconscious bias and really be aware of the impact of our actions. And how can I invite students, staff, families, community members to offer perspectives on the documentation? Again, going back to voices. And also looking at, I mean, over a period of time, what notice in terms of different contexts, does time um, change what is observed too? And with the voices, it's like what voices are representative, and making sure that the voices that are missing are heard. And so the next steps or the reflection is really reflecting on potential next steps based on the analysis of the documentation. What is not working? What needs to be changed? How to partner with stakeholders such as families, careholders, community members to determine next steps, and to confront biases and remove barriers that may be impacting student learning and well-being. And then what other professional learning needs, and also what further evidence of learning documentation still needs to be gathered. And also analyzing what is the effectiveness of the actions in relations to the goals. So what I find this, and it really connected with me because I focus on professional development in my practicum. And I'll discuss later about this when I discuss the practicum storefront, is getting educators to buy in, getting support from families, and the key in terms of building relationships. Um, so the SIP is important, um, and also professional development so much about focusing on how to grow teacher capacity in the school's area of focus. So that's focus on the SIP itself, and then again with the ensuring staff buy-in by hearing their voices, and when they feel heard, there is more likely to be that buy-in. And so structures as barriers are agents of change, really identifying what is inhibiting learning in the schools, what are these boxes, and so how do how to think outside of the box. Now there is often